Good evening. Welcome to Headlines and Beyond on INN for March 15th, 2012. Tonight, we are on day two of our war watch with Iran. Yesterday, I declared that we were going to begin on this show to watch for war with Iran, that enough had transpired that CNN had sort of shifted its tune and has started warmongering and pushing us closer to war with Iran. This was no exception today on Anderson Cooper, who is now, I will call him a chicken hawk, because he is advocating war with Syria now, uh, because of what he perceives as humanitarian wrongs going on in Syria. Uh, the irony here is the footage that he was using to demonstrate this wrongs that were going on in Syria were old footage. He wasn't using new footage. He had mentioned the night before, and they were still talking about it tonight, about the new report that came out by Amnesty International on torture in Syria, which many really aren't that surprised about because we know there had been cases prior to that. But what they didn't report on CNN, and they did report it on the BBC because they went into more details on it, is the report from Amnesty International is not a new report. It's an old report that is being brought forward now. Now, why they're bringing forward an old report now for March is beyond me, but that's what they're doing anyways. These are people who were interviewed back in February. They interviewed 25 people, and the report describes the tortures that they were put through, which included standing in uncomfortable positions, being having their clothes taken away, sleep deprivation, and then it exceeds on up from there on up. But not surprisingly, that you would hear, a lot of rhetoric about this. Now, the thing that sort of pops into my mind is that if they're talking about a lot of stuff that we're talking about in the air report, can be easily seen at Gitmo. It can easily be seen in the American prisons. There's the soldier Bradley Manning, who is now being charged in the WikiLeaks case as aiding Al Qaeda, which is kind of ironic since the United States is now funneling and Israel is now funneling weapons to Al Qaeda. That they had him standing. They had him in a cell naked by himself without any blankets or anything on with a so-called suicide watch for a while there. In other words, a lot of the torture that Syria is being accused of isn't anything new in the United States. It isn't anything we haven't heard in regards to Abu Ghraib. It isn't any, so we ourselves are not cleansed of this. So what this is a, if you want to call it a person with a glass house throwing stones. He without sin, throw the first stone. That type of situation. But none of this is highlighted on CNN. Anderson Cooper does not go into any of the details like this. What he does is ratchet up the rhetoric in terms of saying that something has to be done, and the conclusion at the end, the line at the end, in terms of what the commentators is that the rebels in the Free Syrian Army have to be armed, right? And then there needs to be these air corridors in Syria to prevent Syria from bombing and attacking its own people. Well, what I found out from my sources just yesterday, and it was right before I went on the news, but then I wasn't able to sort of finish putting everything together, is I found 3 other sources for video for footage from Syria, And one of the footage, as I was watching it, showed tanks being delivered to the Syrian rebel forces, and along with RPGs and other munitions. So the Free Syrian forces and the rebel forces, if you want to call them this, although they are Al Qaeda, uh, have been receiving weapons from the get-go. So when you see a tank on the news going in and shelling on a city, you need to ask yourself the question whether this is a Syrian army tank or is this a tank used by the rebel and the Free Syrian Army. So you get weapon on weapon there. This now tells us that the human casualties that are occurring in there, um, the civilians who are being killed in the crossfire. These are now can classify them as collateral damage. And so far, from what I've seen, the collateral damage is not outside of what the United States and the Israeli army considers to be collateral damage. So it's not that Syria is slaughtering its people. It's this collateral damage that both the United States and Israel defines as collateral damage as occurring in these situations. This does not lessen the humanitarian tragedy that's occurring there. This does not lessen the humanitarian need that's sort of required. It just highlights that this is not a one-sided thing. That it's not just simply, oh, these people, they're there, they want to fight for their independence. This was never the case, and this is where I say that this is where politics make strange bedfellows, because Fox News reportedly showed a plane again from some of these sites, a cargo plane landing from Iran at the Syrian military base, and they stated that they were unloading, assumingly unloading military weapons. And I assume that's what they were doing, unloading military weapons. And one would have to ask, and this, going back to the whole comment on politics being strange bedfellows, because normally Iran would be funding not only Syria, but it would be funding and arming Hezbollah. It funds and arms Hamas. It funds and arms some of the Taliban in Afghanistan. There's a relationship there. So Iran is not a stranger to funding Al Qaeda and arming Al Qaeda itself. But in this case, Bashir is not Al Qaeda. He's not. His forces aren't on the radical Islamic side. He's on sort of near where the moderates are. He does not believe and has not practiced, from what I understand. He's not. His wife, as they appear on, they seem to be more of the secular Middle Easterns. And this is something I need to address, is that because I'm of Middle Eastern and Greek background, and I'm going to stop using the term Arab, because it's come to my attention now, and as I've gone through this, is that there is a belief that we are all Arabs, and that we are recent transplants to the area, just the way the modern Israelis are. And this couldn't be further from the truth. This is initially, this is where it's ironic. This view of the dark people in the Middle East, and I'm one of the dark people. That's my last name is Kara. Sakara means dark. And I come from an area in Greece where we are dark, we are more Middle Eastern, we are, of that sort of ethnic background. And I could trace my roots all the way back to Greeks in Cappadocia, which is now part of Turkey. And the thing is the cultures there. If you know your cultures, the cultures between Syria, Greece, and even into Egypt and into Iraq, they're very similar. There's a lot of similarities between the cultures there that are not common to the European Greeks who are more Germanic. So there's two types of Greeks. There's the Euro Greeks who are primarily white and European, and then there are the non-white Greeks, or they're not necessarily black or dark, or who are darker than the white Greeks, and have a non-European culture. And it's been since the Nazis, and a little bit even before the Nazis, but the Nazis really brought this up, that the dark people in the Middle East aren't really there, as they weren't the builders of the ancient cities. They weren't the right Christians. That these people were invaders to the area and had taken over all the white, what they call what they believe to be the white Christian churches. This was actually the argument put forward for the Crusades. And this is where you need to do some reading. I will, if you want to understand some of the Christianity, I'm going to have you take a look at. This is not a Roman Catholic reference. This is actually more of a pre-Roman Catholic reference. Look up the. There is an ancient author named Bede, and if you look for the classical history of Bede and the works of Bede, he's got a number of works out there. You can find an understanding of what was before the Catholic Church, and that will sort of help you understand as you start looking for sources on the Crusades, to read up on the Crusades. You can sort of understand how the thinking was and then became, because Bede was before the Crusades, and he was in England, and then you can see how the views developed after the Crusades or during the Crusades, that really were part of the racism that came out of Europe. And Europe, the racism is not simply defined to America in terms of slavery. It's across the board. It was all the way throughout Europe in terms of how it dealt with people who weren't white, or what they considered to be white. And so I'm not going to be using the term Arab anymore. I'm going to be using the term Middle Eastern people, because I don't want to give the singular identity of Arab, which is a later movement, to the entire Middle East, and give the racist theory of transplanting any credibility. So that being said, what you have now in the Middle East in terms of the dynamic is you have Iranians, again, they're not Arabs themselves, they're Persians, going in to Syria and protecting a government that does not necessarily agree with their political philosophies. And this is sort of an alliance. These are alliances of convenience. That it's ended up that Syria, even though it is not radicalized, wound up in the sphere of Iran. Syria is also very close geographically to Iran, and you can have good air routes from Israel to Iran in order to attack a number of what they consider to be where the nuclear plants would be. So Syria needs to be and is the front door at this particular point in time, because Iraq failed and Afghanistan failed in terms of how the Americans are able to put in bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. So now it's left up to Israel, and in order for Israel to go from Israel to Iran for an attack, it has to get rid of the Syrian air defenses. And this is actually what's going on the ground now. And this is why when one of the videos were put up, something caught my eye, and I paused the video. And I have the ability to do videos frame by frame and slow it down bit by bit. And what did I see on one of the on the back of a tank that was being used by the rebel army? and it was Israeli writing. It was the Israeli graphics on the back. Now this was clearly an older tank. It's not that the Israelis are giving him new modern equipment. They're giving him the older equipment in much less capacity. But nonetheless, the weapons are flowing from Israel into the rebel allied parties, which are Al-Qaeda affiliated. They're affiliated with a lot of the jihadist groups out there. So here's where it comes up. The United States and Israel are allied with the jihadist groups who are initially attacking the United States and Israel and interested in wiping both of them off the map. And Iran is backing the non-jihadist group, which is Bashir's army. So this is the dynamic that's going on now, and this is the situation that we're in. So both sides are in there. Iran is in there fighting it out with its covert operatives and supplying the Syrian army. Israel and the United States is in Syria battling it out against the Bashirian army with their allies Al-Qaeda. And there is this push in the media to present this as a humanitarian action rather than what it really is, and this is the Cold War, the precursor war before the hot war with Iran. And this line of thinking was espoused to by the political group AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, months ago. As a matter of fact, when this started, the AIPAC had been on this kick on trying to get into Iraq. As a matter of fact, even during the 2008 election, and before the 2008 election, Israel had put on this whole thing about how it wanted to attack Iran, to have Iran as a target. And they wanted the United States at the time, they wanted George Bush to go into Iran and attack Iran. And George Bush said, sorry, we got our hands full of both Iraq and Afghanistan. So this is a renewed attempt with AIPAC and Israel to attack Iran. They are consigned to, sort of resigned to the number of people who will be killed in Tel Aviv because, well, they may not. They can stop a large chunk of the missiles coming in with some of the new missile defense system they just recently got. They can't stop all the missiles from hitting. So they say, well, and this is what a lot of militaries do, and the United States does this as well, is they say if there's a conflict, and sometimes they say you need a conflict in order to resolve certain issues, that there is a certain number of acceptable casualties on both sides, innocent civilians on both sides, in order to achieve this military and strategic objective. And this is what they term collateral damage. Collateral damage is the number of innocent people killed, this is more specifically, and then to a lesser degree injured in a military operation against another military entity. So it's military. They consider this military to military action, and in between, civilians get killed. That's the collateral damage. There's damage that's on the side that they say is not intended. However, this is not always the case because, they don't necessarily have to go to war. There are other options besides war. But let's say now, and here's where the hypocrisy comes in. When you're going up against this, and this is why I say this whole humanitarian aid thing is a farce with Syria. If you consider that the battle is already starting in Syria, which is the Cold War for Iran, if you have both the Russian Navy and the American Navy sort of pacing each other down off the coast of Syria, then the tensions to this conflict have already begun. The Pentagon and both the Kremlin are on high alert. So this is why I say we can now going to declare that this war in Syria, the Cold War in Syria, and the number of people being killed in there has nothing to do with humanity. Is not a humanitarian issue. It is a military issue. The people being killed in between are the collateral damage, and unfortunately, we've seen the UN now, rather than being neutral, has taken sides. And we've seen this before, that the UN has taken sides. UN has not always been neutral. As a matter of fact, the International Criminal Court is a political farce and has been using its weight, its sort of weight and legitimacy to create something known as a regime change. This is the new philosophy of the UN. This is the new attempt at what they call a global governance and an international governance. And it is strongly European, white-oriented leaning. What do I mean by that? The EU, and to a large chunk the United States, has been exempted from being prosecuted in the criminal court. So that means anybody who is white, the white Europeans, can't be prosecuted for war crimes in the International Criminal Court. They're exempt. They will never have war crimes charges brought against them. They will never appear in court. And this is the way it is. It's only for people who are not white. This is who the court is for, in terms of who the court is going to act against. And they're doing this in the name that we're going to protect all the non-white people. Thank you very much. And so this gives you an idea now of what the global situation is, where Syria sits in this, and where the humanitarian crisis which is occurring in Syria comes from. Now, this actually today took a step further forward today with the European Union stating on Saturday that its banking arm called SWIFT, that controls the transactions between countries in EU and through the EU, is now going to block Iran from accessing its facilities. And that means there is a banking freeze-out going on as a result of these UN sanctions on Iran. And these are more certainly, they say that if this does occur on Saturday, as the news is now stating that it does, that Iran will more certainly than not start cutting off the oil supply to Europe. Now, there have been a number of pundits who are out there saying that this doesn't matter, that if Iran cuts off oil to Europe, but we've seen already where Brent crude and light sweet crude have gone. They're just right now, they're through the roof. They're at the highest they've ever been, and they're threatening the economic stability even further of Europe. So what happens is that this is what we're seeing right now, is that we're really in a game of brinksmanship, and they haven't. And here's where the assumption is. The assumption is that the war with Iran will be hunky dory, that everything will go okay, that we'll be able to walk through this no problem. But if you look at Afghanistan, you look at the issues occurring now in Afghanistan, and some of the stuff that hasn't even appeared in the news on CNN, it does appear on BBC, it does appear in other areas. I've got this broadcast about the effects of depleted uranium in Afghanistan on both the American soldiers and the civilians in Afghanistan. This report was not on American TV, on any of the American broadcast channels. This report was on Al Jazeera, reporting that there are going to be sicknesses and illnesses, and they've even traced birth defects in Afghanistan to the use of the depleted uranium in Afghanistan. So the question is now is that, you know, other major powers like Russia and China see this. They see the aggression coming from the West. They see the aggression of UK. They see the aggression of France. They see the aggression of Germany. They see the aggression of the United States. They're not going to go, oh, well, let's back down. They're going to do what they've been doing. They're building their military. They're moving into opposition with the United States. So it's reigniting the larger global Cold War that had been resolved. We are now back in the situation where we can now add on a watch for the Third World War, because you now have tensions on the old Cold War. There's two Cold Wars. The one we are in now is the Islamic Cold War, where we're fighting against covertly against the jihadists. And there was the original Cold War before 1990, from 1945 to 1990, against the Soviet Union, against communism. So first it was the communists, now it's the jihadists, right? So that's the first Cold War with the communists. The first Cold War was against the communists. The second Cold War is now against the jihadists. Well, what's happening now is that because of what's going on in Syria and the threat into Iran, we're now seeing the old Cold War dynamics, the first Cold War dynamics, now resetting themselves, so that it is now again the old Cold War allies lining up against the old Cold War allies, you know, in the West. So it's now Russia, China, Iran, Syria against the EU and the United States. This is the dynamic of the situation. This is the way the situation is working itself out in Syria and in Iran. So the thing is, there is no easy solution, because we're not at the end of something, at the end of a war. We're at the beginning, and this is not a hot war. This is the Cold War. So and the thing is, you can sort of see this in terms of the collateral damage, in terms of the number of people being hurt and killed in Syria. It is significantly less than Iraq. It's significantly less than Afghanistan. It's significantly less than what you see and saw in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the issue that's coming up now is, if we push forward towards a hotter war, what's the collateral damage going to look like? So this is the end of a second week. Tomorrow, I might do a second one. I still haven't decided yet, but there will be a documentary uploaded to the channel, and we're going to start doing our background video references, our documentaries, so that we can start learning about more of why what's going on is actually going on, and adding in more dimensions. All right, have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow night.